Let us pray. As Canadians and as Albertans, we give thanks for the precious gifts of freedom and peace which we enjoy. As members of this Legislative Assembly, we rededicate ourselves to the valued traditions of parliamentary democracy as a means of serving our province and our country. Amen.
Introduction of visitors. Presenting petitions.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to present a petition signed by 250 of 300 families in the Mirror area calling for the fair application of the extended flat rate calling program to the Mirror area, which would have the result of reducing to an extended flat rate calling rate the toll fee now charged between Mirror and Red Deer.
Reading and receiving petitions. Presenting reports by standing and special committees. Notices of motions.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd request permission to give oral notice of motion and would ask that all members provide unanimous consent in order to deal with this motion today. This is the first time I've had the opportunity to do so, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Minister, courtesy of the House does require that the other members are indeed no doubt going to be enthusiastic about what the topic is, but at least the topic might be mentioned to the House.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. The topic would be in generalities with regards to the Grey Cup festivities that just took place. Thank you. Be it resolved that the Assembly congratulates the Edmonton Eskimos, players, coaches, management and support staff for their fine achievement in winning the Stanley Cup.
Great.
That too. That's next.
Mr. Speaker, I might be a little presumptuous in assuming that's the next event that will take place. Of course, that would be their recent Grey Cup victory. In moving the motion, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to salute the hard work, dedication, and team spirit which has carried the Eskimos to victory. While some of my colleagues who hail from a point south of here may feel their loyalties lie elsewhere, and I'm looking forward, Mr. Russell. Nevertheless, I'd ask all members as proud Albertans to join me in supporting the motion now before the Assembly.
The Chair takes it that there is indeed unanimous support of the House with respect to the Grey Cup victors. Okay. Carried.
Introduction of bills.
Member for Lethbridge West.
Mr. Speaker, I request leave to introduce Bill 276, the Child Access Act. Mr. Speaker, there's perhaps as many as some 50,000 parents, not to mention grandparents in Alberta, that have difficulty with access to children of marriages that have broken up in spite of the court orders. Mr. Speaker, this bill, if adopted, will provide an enforcement of an access provision whereby these parents in Alberta will have access to those very children.
The honourable member for Lethbridge West has moved for first reading Bill 276, Child Access Act. Does the Assembly agree to this motion for first reading? Opposed? So ordered.
Bill number 276, Child Access Acts, introduced by the Honourable Member Mr. Gogo, is now read a first time.
The For Calgary Buffalo.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to introduce Bill 241, the Consumer Advocates Act. This bill would create the position of a Consumer Advocate of Alberta, whose role it would be to investigate any consumer complaint over which the Ombudsman does not have jurisdiction. This bill would allow the Legislative Assembly to provide the Consumer Advocate with a fund of money to assist individuals or consumer groups with the preparation and presentation of submission at regulatory hearings. It would also allow the Consumer Advocate to investigate complaints of investors or depositors in financial institutions and to commence legal proceedings on their behalf. Would be particularly helpful in situations such as the current principal group matter.
The honourable member for Calgary Buffalo has moved first reading of Bill 241, Consumer Advocates Act. Does the Assembly agree to this motion for first reading? Opposed? So ordered.
Bill number 241, Consumer Advocates Act, introduced by the honourable member, Mr. Schumer, is now read a first time. Tabling returns and reports.
Minister of the Environment.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to file the answer to motion for return 206 and to table with the Legislative Assembly copies of the annual report 1986-87 of the Alberta Environmental Centre.
Introduction of special guests.
Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to introduce two groups today. First, the Greenfield School, some 54 students. They're in the public gallery, grades 5 and 6 students from the constituency of Edmonton-Whitemud. They are accompanied by teachers, Mrs. Joan Williams, Mr. David Taverner, parents, Mrs. Juliet Evans, Mrs. Palmer, and Mrs. Joan Bessler. I'd ask the students to rise and be recognized by the Assembly. Also, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to introduce a school from the constituency of Park Allen for my colleague, the Honourable Neil Crawford. There are some 26 students. They're in the members gallery. They are accompanied by their teachers, Miss Ursula Buffy, Miss Louise Cooper, and parents, Miss Sylvia Turner. And I know Miss Buffy has made sure that these students are very aware of the operations of government, both municipal, provincial, and federal. And I ask them to stand, be recognized by the Assembly.
Edmonton Avonmore.
Mr. Speaker, I wish to introduce to you and through you to the members of this Assembly on behalf of my colleague from Edmonton Highlands, 17 grade 10 students from Concordia High School who are accompanied by their teacher, Mr. Keith Cruz. I would ask that they rise and receive the warm welcome of this Assembly.
Minister of Education, followed by Edmonton Meadowlark.
Mr. Speaker, I'm very pleased today to introduce 30 students from the Glenora Elementary School in the Edmonton-Glenora constituency. They are accompanied by Mr. Ken Kirsch, a long-time and well-loved teacher at the school, and I would ask them to all rise and be welcomed by the Assembly.
Edmonton Meadowlark.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to introduce to you and through you to the members of the legislature 11 people from Mirror in the constituency of Lacombe. They are led by Gary Cummings and are here in support of the petition that I just introduced concerning the extension of the extended flat rate calling program to the Mirror area. I would ask that they all rise at this time and receive the recognition of the legislature. Thank you.
The chair would like to point out a concern about the irregularity of introducing groups from other members' constituencies. And the chair has received a note of complaint with respect to this regard, and so Perhaps the member for Edmonton Meadowlark and myself could have some consultation about this practice.
Ministerial statements. Oral question period.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to direct the first question to the Premier. Mr. Speaker, the Premier has previously indicated to this Assembly that he would probably say no to any trade agreement that did not include the elimination of the U.S. Federal Energy Regulatory Commission special tax on Alberta gas sold in the U.S. market. Mr. Speaker, and I quote from April the 10th, where the Premier says, "However, it's finally agreed it will eliminate tariffs, countervails that we have known, matters such as FERC has put on our natural gas, matters about softwood lumber." Mr. Speaker, and he emphasized, we'll either eliminate those things or I don't think a trade agreement would really be effective, and we would probably say no. Mr. Speaker, to the Premier, the FERC decision stands. Why has he not said no to the Mulroney trade deal and done what he said he would do back in April, Mr. Speaker?
Obviously, Mr. Speaker, any trade agreements commencing on January the 1st, 1989 runs into the future. It isn't retroactive. And we believe that this trade agreement will, in fact, stop the very FERC decisions and others, as referred to by the Honourable Leader of the Opposition. And in addition, of course, provide an incredible opportunity to Albertans to expand their horizons in the entire markets for their products.
Mr. Speaker, it does not stop the FERC decision. That's very clear. Even the federal government has acknowledged this. My question to the Premier is simply this. In view of the fact that it doesn't stop any of these things, why, again, is he so enthusiastically supporting this package, which could hurt Alberta? There's no doubt about it, Mr. Speaker.
He's not accurate again, Mr. Speaker. The matter of FERC rulings are under this trade agreement.
Mr. Speaker, that's such absolute nonsense. How that Premier can stand and say that? That's not true, and he knows it, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, let me ask this question to the Premier. Did he even raise this matter of the FERC decision at the First Minister's Conference just concluded last week?
Mr. Speaker, as I told the House last week, we have had some 9 First Ministers' meetings on trade. Through most of these, I chaired the Premier's portion of these trade negotiations. We know what's in the agreement, and the matter of FERC was raised constantly, and the matter of FERC is contained in this agreement.
Mr. Speaker, it is not, and I quote Mr. Wilson, who says this does not change any of the regulatory practices which already have been agreed to. That's from the federal minister, Mr. Speaker. My question is, why did the Premier agree to support this trade deal without making that very clear that we would not support it without that FERC decision being removed right at the start, Mr. Speaker?
Well, Mr. Speaker, he has now confirmed my answer as being accurate. I said that this agreement deals from January the 1st on, and that FERC will be under this agreement, and that it will be reviewed, and that it will be considered before the dispute settlements agreement under this trade agreement. And he's very inaccurate and does not know what he's talking about.
Supplementary, Westlock Sturgeon.
My supplementary is to the Premier, Mr. Speaker. Also in line with this, he's probably aware that CPAC, that's small oil and gas producers, are not too happy about what he thinks is such a wonderful deal, in that they are going to be restricted to raising money in Canada. Otherwise, they will lose their identity as a Canadian company. Now, could he tell us whether he's going to go to bat with the Prime Minister to change it so that small American companies, which now can raise money on both sides of the border, will not have a competitive advantage over small Canadian oil companies, which will only be allowed to raise money in Canada. Otherwise, they will lose their Canadian identification.
Mr. Speaker, I've met with the CPAC group. I've met with them often. And I believe that when the details of the agreement are fully spelled out, that they are going to be in support of this agreement. I must say, Mr. Speaker, that one of the things that's so discouraging to many Albertans is that the leader of the opposition, the leader of the Liberal Party, despite the fact that this is a tremendous opportunity for Albertans, are so caught up in negative thinking and opposition, they can't realize what's good for this province.
Order, please. It's not a point of order. The second main question, Leader of the Opposition.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, we're trying to get the facts. That's all we're trying to do. He doesn't seem to know. But I'd like to designate my question to the member from Edmonton Strathcona.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In 1983, there circulated in the Department of Consumer and Corporate Affairs a discussion paper, and I have a question relating thereto for the Premier. In the discussion paper, which concerned deposit-taking institutions under provincial jurisdiction, it said, the goal is to introduce reasonable and effective safeguards that would protect both the public interest and the stability of our financial institutions. My question, Mr. Speaker, is, why, in the 4 years that have elapsed since that discussion paper, have the rules not been changed by one jot or tittle to the great hurt of tens of thousands, I suggest, of Albertans?
Obviously, Mr. Speaker, having been sworn in on November 1st, 85, I'm not able to go back in history and review discussion papers. However, the honourable member has drawn one to my attention. I would be pleased to take a look at it. Perhaps either the provincial treasurer or the Minister of Consumer and Corporate Affairs may wish to respond to it after they've reviewed it.
2 years and a month.
Mr. Speaker, would not the Premier agree that the lapse is all the more remarkable having regard to the detailed proposals in that paper, both as to greater disclosure to the public and also as to more rigorous safeguards for the public?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I wouldn't agree to that without doing some additional review. He's referring to just one paper that might be before the government. Obviously, there are a whole variety of options that would have to be considered.
Mr. Speaker, my next supplementary, just to pay attention to only one of the proposals, would the Premier not agree that if a single proposal recommended in that paper, namely that to put all deposit-taking provincial institutions under Canada Deposit Insurance, that change alone would have saved the woe of, as I say, tens of thousands of Albertans now?
Well, it is a proposal that the honourable member is referring to, Mr. Speaker, but it's certainly not always possible to have every type of deposit covered by CDIC. Somebody ends up having to pay for that.
Yes, my final supplementary is to the Treasurer. Why on earth, Mr. Speaker, cannot the public have access to the financial returns by these deposit-taking institutions filed pursuant to the Investment Contracts Act in the absence of a secrecy provision in the statute, as the Treasurer says we cannot? I remind him we asked for that in July of this year, and he replied in August, no, in respect of two of them.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I know of no provision which prevent an investor who is making a decision to invest in a particular institution from requesting that information from the company or from the Securities Commission. In the case of those investments which are exempt under the securities legislation, for example, it is assumed that if you invest more than $100,000, if my memory is right, I think it's $97,000, that you would ask for that information and be provided by the Securities Commission. In all other cases, it's normally provided by the companies themselves, the shareholders. If it's not provided, I, as a shareholder or as an investor, would certainly ask those questions.
Supplementary, Calgary-Buffalo.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. To the provincial treasurer, I was denied a copy of the audited financial statements of First Investors and Associated Investors by the acting superintendent of insurance of his department this summer. Why is it that under his regime, neither investors nor members of the public could get copies of audited financial statements which were required by law to be filed with his department, and in respect of which there was no secrecy provision in the legislation whatsoever? Why was his government administering this so as to keep basic financial information away from the public?
Well, Mr. Speaker, first of all, I would have imagined that if somebody wanted information of that sort, it would have gone to the company themselves. That's the normal process in these matters. Moreover, Mr. Speaker, there is no request to my office. The normal communication between MLAs is between MLAs and cabinet ministers.
That's correct. Main question, Leader of the Liberal Caucus.
Mr. Speaker, the question is to the Premier. Welcome him back after his Ontario suntan. But the vacant seat, Senate seat exists in the province, Mr. Speaker, one that should be filled by an election in which the Premier appears to be shelving or dodging about. And apparently can't understand that this is a rare opportunity, Mr. Premier, for you to look like a nation builder rather than somebody just trying to sell the country to the Americans. But nevertheless, can the Premier guarantee, the natives are restless tonight, Mr. Speaker, can the Premier guarantee that he will not recommend a Senate appointment to the Prime Minister without some means of an election?
Well, Mr. Speaker, obviously that guarantee can't be made. As I've told many people, and I'm sure I've said it in the House, that we are looking at the possibilities, complexities, I must admit as well, of having some type of an elected process in order to establish a list of nominees for the Senate. It isn't a simple thing, obviously, to try and come up with an elected process for an appointed body. But nevertheless, we're looking at it.
Mr. Speaker, to the Premier, would he care to state his opinion on the former Deputy Premier's comment that on that list there should only be those that belong to the Conservative Party?
Former Deputy Premier, I guess he was referring to Dr. Hugh Horner. I thought it was an interesting thought.
Thank you, Mr. Premier. Now, or Mr. Speaker, now the truth will out. Will the Premier consider setting a Senate election at the same time as the next provincial election?
I'm sure, Mr. Speaker, in the course of the studying of the options and complexities, that'd be one thing to be looked at.
Mr. Speaker, I can only think of the Premier's only word. You must seize the decision now. Don't be a wimp. Are you ready to announce when there will be a Senate election?
Mr. Speaker, I wouldn't want the Liberal Party, because of the position they've taken on free trade, to try and expand more of us into that select group that we acknowledge they are.
Supplementary, Vegreville.
Speaker, is the Premier willing to send the would-be Conservative senator from West Loch Sturgeon to Ottawa before Christmas, complete with a no-trade contract?
Mr. Speaker, I'd send him and try for another barrel of wine.
Leader of the Representative Caucus, followed by the member for Bow Valley, followed by Vegreville.
Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Premier, and it's with regards to a document that has been published by the government as of late on the Canada-U.S. Free Trade Agreement. The document outlines very clearly the potential new jobs that may be available in Alberta and as well in Canada, according to the Economic Council of Canada. Could the Premier indicate whether any kind of statistic is available as to the number of persons that may be displaced in this process of the free trade implementation? And I ask this question, Mr. Speaker, on the basis that Albertans are saying, and a number are saying to me, that we've got to hear both sides of the argument, not just one side, and that information would be very valuable.
Mr. Speaker, the whole idea of jobs and people being displaced, I think, are very theoretical. because frankly, what the trade arrangement does is provide opportunities. And it provides opportunities for people and companies to expand their horizons into greater markets, greater growth for not only them, but our children in the future. And I believe that in Alberta, we are so confident and able to compete with anyone that in Alberta we can't even see the full edges, if you like, or the horizons that we'll be able to reach for under this trade agreement. And so any listing of numbers, I think, is not helpful in that regard.
Mr. Speaker, supplementary to the Premier, I can't argue with the objectives of free trade and the potential benefits, but we do have to look at both sides when we're asking the people of the province to make a decision. The Prime Minister, in your discussions, and I would understand this occurred last week, indicated that he would like to support what he calls an advisory council to assist the federal government in making this transition and to assist people that may be dislocated during this free trade implementation. Could the Premier indicate whether he or his government have considered the same kind of an advisory council or transitional committee to assist in working with dislocated workers?
Mr. Speaker, there'd be no question as the trade agreement was signed and started to operate that we are prepared, along with the federal government, and we've discussed this many times over the last 18 months, to work and provide transitional assistance to any group of Albertans who require retraining or assistance in a different type of employment. And it would be one of the matters that would be dealt with by our Minister of Career Development and Employment and other labor ministers.
Mr. Speaker, supplementary to the Premier, could the Premier indicate at what point in time some of the assessments will take place in terms of the effect in our labor market and in our private sector market, so that at that point in time, when you know what the problem is and know where our deficiencies are or are not in government, we can react in terms of various programs, such as interim educational grant programs or the further utilization of our current employment programs. Where will the Premier see the government doing an assessment that has objective credibility?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the honourable member would know that the way he's described that is completely hypothetical, because obviously there may well be in Alberta a capacity to handle any temporary problems created in any narrow part of our economy and not require any particular assistance. I mean, after all, the strength of this province is the people of this province, the people who are able to adapt and to develop within new opportunities. Now, we will obviously have to be alert to make sure, but that will come in the future after January the 1st, 89, and we have an agreement with the federal government, and it obviously would cooperate with any members of the legislature, any members of industry, labor, to make sure that all of this assistance is available should it be required.
Final supplementary. All right. Member for Edmonton Goldbyre, followed by Leader of the Opposition, followed by Red Deer North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My supplementary is to the Minister of Career Development and Employment. From your many studies on free trade, which you have access to and we unfortunately don't, you must know where those jobs will be potentially lost. Has consultation occurred with these businesses and industries in order to put retraining opportunities in place so these people need not move out of province?
Mr. Speaker, as the Premier said, it's hypothetical that there will be job losses, but I think it's important to understand that thousands of people every year change jobs. So if you are moving from one job to another, you must access training opportunities that are available to you. We expect in the next decade there will be some 238,000 jobs created in Alberta, not including the 40,000 jobs that are anticipated through free trade. obviously, with this type of job creation, there's going to be a need for training, and every province in this country is involved in training to deal with movements between career and from career to career. So it's not a unique situation where you see people moving from one job to another, Mr. Speaker. So in the event that there are across this country, if there are areas where there are people being dislocated from their jobs, there are mechanisms in place. But certainly, the job creation that will result far outweighs any displacement that may occur as a result of free trade.
Leader of the Opposition, followed by Red Deer North.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, to the Premier. It's all right to see everything through rose-colored glasses, Mr. Speaker. But the Premier is well aware that most people do not know and they require more information. My question is, if it's so good, we've asked before, would the Premier table the studies that this government has on the possible job benefits and losses and table it here in the Assembly so we can all make up our own mind?
Mr. Speaker, the honourable member can put anything on the order paper that he likes, and then we deal with it. I might say, Mr. Speaker, as I've travelled around Alberta lately, and we've had a recent poll in Chinook where we talked about these things, and I found that the people of Alberta have really made up their minds, Mr. Speaker.
Speaker, my question's also... They just can't handle good news, Mr. Speaker. My question is also to the Minister of Career Development. In light of recent facts that show that in the gas industry alone, an increase of 1% of U.S. market share means 7,500 more jobs, is his department gearing up now to be able to handle the employment demands that are going to be put on the employment sector in general?
Mr. Speaker, in this province, we are going to be faced with some tremendous challenges in terms of dealing with not only free trade to this province, but also to the expansion of industry in this province. We have championed forest products. We are looking at new initiatives in the heavy oil areas, in the oil sands, major construction plants, the magnesium plant at Peace River. We have got, or at High River, we have got tremendous challenges as a province to deal with the tremendous growth of the economy in this province. And I believe that we're up to the challenge. We're watching it very closely, Mr. Speaker, and we do not want to get caught in a labor shortage in this province to match the diversification that's happening today.
Member for Bow Valley, followed by the member for Vegreville.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister of Technology, Research and Telecommunications, and it has to do with the party line conversion to private lines in Alberta over the next 5 years. Now, in a recent document, it is noted that the ones towards the end of the 5-year period will be eligible for a PCL1 converter. It's only to last until their part of the community is converted to a full party line. Now, could the minister tell me at which stage of the 5 years they'll be eligible for those PCL ones? Is it 2 years or 3 years from the end of the conversion period?
Mr. Speaker, I can advise that the reason for the PLC1 converter, which provides some improved or enhanced telephone service for party line subscribers. The reason for proceeding with that program is because of the tremendous number of letters and requests that we're getting for improved telephone service quickly. In other words, a great deal of support for the party line conversion program that's underway. That will take about 5 years, and the intent is to provide approximately 40,000, the people primarily in the last 2 years of the program, so that they would get some enhanced service earlier than otherwise. In fact, hopefully within the next 8 months or so. And that would be an effort to treat them as fairly as other rural telephone subscribers.
Supplementary question, Mr. Speaker. When those people in the last 2 years get the PCL1 converters to assist them with their party line system, will they then have to pay the charge for going on the party line?
Yeah, Mr. Speaker, there is no charge to those people who will be getting the PLC1 converters until the point in time at which they are converted to the enhanced service, that is the total private line situation. There is no charge for the conversion as such. However, they will be able to purchase, should they wish, or rent different telephone equipment, answering devices for their telephones, cordless telephones, etc. That will be a personal responsibility, and it will require the jacking of those houses, which is a part of the basic program.
Supplementary, Mr. Speaker. Is it possible, if these people on these PCL1 converters like the service that they're getting from that service, is it permissible or even possible that they would decide to keep that service rather than converting to the full private line?
No, Mr. Speaker, it is not. The converter will not be the property of the telephone subscriber, and the converter will in fact be removed as soon as their line is switched fully over to the private line.
Supplementary, Bow Valley. Vegreville, supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, to the Minister, and he well knows that we on this side of the House support most aspects of the program, except the recent moves by the Minister and AGT to make it compulsory. And I'm wondering what this Minister says to people in rural Alberta who are quite happy with party line service, who don't want private line service, that they in fact will have to pay the $450 fee or lose their telephone because it's now made mandatory.
Well, Mr. Speaker, one portion of the response to persons who have that concern is that the government or other Albertans through the Alberta Heritage Savings Trust Fund are already paying over 75% of the cost of providing those lines to individual subscribers. And secondly, Mr. Speaker, it is more economic and will save costs to the telephone company to have a standard level of service. Mr. Speaker, I think those are the two leading reasons or two leading responses that I would give. I think in terms of economy it is important, since other Albertans are paying for the bulk of the cost, that other Albertans deserve to have it provided as efficiently and as economically as possible.
Supplementary, Edmonton Meadowlark.
Mr. Speaker, neither of those two responses contemplates the problem of an individual family which simply cannot afford to buy the private line service. What remedy would the Minister suggest he would have in place in that case?
Well, Mr. Speaker, first of all, it's important to recognize that the subscriber at the point of conversion has the option of paying in one lump sum or paying on a monthly basis. And if the payments are on a monthly basis, the monthly charge is $5 per month. The honourable members will know that because of the tariff imposed by the Public Utilities Board, the government is providing a rebate to all subscribers of $110. That rebate of itself is adequate to provide the monthly payments for 2 years if invested in the interim, and that would mean that the subscriber, however difficult their financial situation, has a period of time in which to arrange their budgetary situation, and we all expect and hope that within a 2-year time frame, most individuals and most families will find that they're able to either change budgeting or perhaps acquire an improved employment position and a better income position.
Main question, Vegreville.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We all recognize that grain farmers in Alberta are facing a bleak winter indeed, with prices in real terms being lower than any time since the 1930s. and it's generally agreed that a deficiency payment much larger than the one last year is required, not only to ensure the survival of many farm families in Alberta, but to ensure the survival of many of the small communities that our farmers support. My question to the Minister is, since the Premier has publicly used a figure of $1.6 billion for the payment, and other governments and farm groups have recommended between $2 and $4 billion as being appropriate, I'm wondering if the Minister will tell us what level of payment he is recommending at Wednesday's meeting of Agriculture Ministers in Ottawa.
Mr. Speaker, I'm happy to re-endorse, and there's only one individual that speaks for this government, and it's the Premier of our province, so the figure is $1.6 billion. But in addition to that, I can share with the honourable member that we have been working very closely with our federal counterparts as it relates to the report that was tabled some time ago dealing with hail and crop insurance, whereby the recommendations that fell under our jurisdiction we have implemented, and we are negotiating with the federal government with the hope of having them accept a number of the worthwhile recommendations to provide a safety net for our grain producers within this province.
Well, supplementary, Mr. Speaker, recognizing that most farmers figure a payment ought to be triggered by the drop in grain prices rather than a drop in the popularity of the Mulroney government, is the Minister... No, this is important. Is the Minister insisting that all monies from the deficiency payment be in the hands of farmers prior to spring seeding so that they can face the coming year with some sense of confidence?
Mr. Speaker, as the Premier and the Premier of Saskatchewan have done in the past, they're going to push to attempt to have the money in the hands of the farmers as quick as possible. We were gratified, Mr. Speaker, by the recent announcement by Charlie Mayer as it relates to a payment under the Western Grain Stabilization Act, which again will inject millions of dollars into the pockets, which is very badly needed by our grain sector, as illustrated by the honourable member for Bakerville.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the Minister recognizes that the Western Grain Stabilization Program is an insurance program that farmers themselves pay into. We're talking about something special here, and I'm wondering, is this government prepared to stand up for our grain farmers by making a commitment to add provincial dollars to whatever level of support the federal government decides to come forward with?
Mr. Speaker, I should just draw to the honourable member's attention, since this was raised by the Western premiers at their meeting in Humboldt, Saskatchewan, that we have very strongly taken the lead in requesting assistance for our grain farmers in this province, and that we have been successful. And it's taken a lot of meetings. We've been talking with the Prime Minister. We've had our ministers talking with ministers of the federal government, and it was confirmed on Friday by the Prime Minister such a payment will be coming out, and that it's hypothetical to say whether there's a need for the provincial government to get involved also, except to point out that this is a national deficiency payment would be coming from the federal government, and there has been no request, as there was not last year, for provincial input. But I must say, Mr. Speaker, I think the federal government has moved. It has moved with $1 billion. We are requesting more, but I think all members should know that when you talk about government money, you are talking about one group of taxpayers assisting another group of taxpayers, and that there has to be some balance to the extent that taxpayers can continue to come up with dollars. We think it's needed. We think it's needed for our grain farmers, at least for another year of low prices. But there has to be some balance in the size of dollars that taxpayers can provide from one group to another.
Is the Premier then saying that he's not prepared to make a commitment of provincial dollars to supplement the $1.6 billion that he's recommending being paid from the federal government? Is that it?
Mr. Speaker, once again, the honourable member isn't listening when I answer his question. In fact, what I said is that we have been successful by representing our people in Alberta very forcefully and very strongly. We've been able to obtain a commitment to another deficiency payment. We've learned from last year that while there were good things about it, there are also some problems, and we will be able, I think, to do some fine-tuning as to how those funds are dispersed. But in fact, this government is committed to the grain producers and all agriculture producers in our province because it is our #1 priority in Alberta.
Supplementary, Littlebow, followed by Westlock Sturgeon.
Of agriculture, and with regards to the dispersing of the funds, could the Minister indicate whether there will be a special allocation again for the irrigation farmers that are in registered districts in this formula? Is that still being considered?
My understanding is, and we're going to have more of a clarification when we do meet in Ottawa on Wednesday of this week, but my understanding is, yes, there will be a special allocation for those irrigation farmers within the recognized districts. As the honourable member is also aware, we had pushed for a recognition of those individual farmers who practice irrigation and who are not presently in a district, so that we would also take into account their increased productivity. But this is something that we have pursued, and it's something that will be clarified more so when we do meet on Wednesday.
Westlock Sturgeon.
Mr. Speaker, this is to the supplemental to the Premier in a statement that he thinks he's been successful in getting the federal government to come up with a payment for the grain farmers. I was wondering, Mr. Speaker, if the Premier would care to enlighten the House and this government or his government would go as far as to reinstitute or bring back the full amount of the royalty or the rebate, fuel rebate for farmers, which would, of course, reduce their fuel cost by about 40%. Would that do? Will he be doing that as one of the provincial prerogatives? Now that he has assured the House that that rebate does not bother the free trade agreement, now that he has assured the House that it's okay to go ahead, will he go ahead now and?
Order, please, honourable member. This is not paragraph after paragraph after paragraph. Take your choice, multiple choice.
I would only say, Mr. Speaker, that the Government of Alberta will continue to provide that the farmers and ranchers in this province have the lowest input costs in North America.
Supplementary, Cypress Redcliffe.
Supplementary question, Mr. Speaker, to the Minister of Agriculture. I wonder, Mr. Speaker, if the Minister of Agriculture is proposing any changes to the grain stabilization plan, whereby those who haven't been in the stabilization plan for a number of years would like to enroll because of the recent payout a number of years. Is he considering any proposals to the federal minister on changes so people get enrolled and get the benefit of the plan?
Mr. Speaker, I believe it was the 16th of November, at which time our Associate Minister of Agriculture was in Ottawa meeting with both Charlie Mayer and John Wise, whereby she did carry on discussions as it related to the proposals in the Hail and Crop Insurance Review report directly related to revenue insurance or cost of production insurance, in which turn it would involve discussion as it related to the Western Grain Transportation or the Western Grain Stabilization Account. I should point out too, Mr. Speaker, contrary to what the honourable member from Vegreville indicated, there is presently a $1.5 billion deficit in that account that has been put forward by the federal government, acknowledging that it is one that there is contributions by the farmers, but presently it is in a deficit position, and we're hopeful that at some time in the future that can be altered with the escalation of grain prices.
Member for Edmonton Meadowlark, followed by Red Deer South, followed by Edmonton Calder, followed by Wainwright.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Alberta Government Telephones utilizes the extended flat rate calling program to help residents of rural communities which need to be in regular contact with larger service centres. To be eligible for a flat rate, the community must lie within a 40-mile radius of the larger centre, yet many communities which meet this criterion do not receive the flat rate. To the Minister of Technology, Research and Telecommunications, will the Minister please explain to this Assembly why Mirror, Alberta, a community 30 miles from Red Deer, does not receive EFRC to this important centre, while Trochu, which is farther away, does receive a flat rate to Red Deer?
Mr. Speaker, I have entertained a considerable number of discussions on the particular matter of the community of Mirror and extended flat rate telephone service. The honourable member for Lacombe has discussed it at length with me and in fact has brought folks from Lacombe to see me from time to time. And Mr. Speaker, the result of that was the extension of flat rate between Mirror and Lacombe, which is the county seat and also the seat for the school board, and I believe is also the location of hospital services. That decision has been taken, Mr. Speaker. The fact is that there are a large number of communities that could access other communities within the radius of 40 miles or 65 kilometers, and it is simply not possible for technical reasons first, and technical reasons can be solved with money, but for monetary reasons, secondly, to provide all of the different connections that could be extended through flat rate at the present time. And the decision was taken that in the case of Mirror, it was important that they be able to relate to their county seat, and that was the reason for the service which they now enjoy, or will enjoy.
Supplementary to the Minister. Will the Minister justify to this House his decision to provide EFRC between Mirror and Lacombe when, in fact, Red Deer is Mirror's major trading partner, and the only criteria that he has mentioned in his assessment of Lacombe as being the area to which Mirror would be able to phone without toll? Those criteria do not affect fundamental economic necessities such as phoning farm implements dealers, phoning people responsible.
Thank your honourable member. We're not going long distance and going for an hour and a half on the question.
Mr. Speaker, to elaborate on what I've already indicated, there are many parents with children in the school system who need to make the contact to the location of the headquarters for the school system and also for the county. And that was the first consideration, and that gets us to the original consideration that was foremost when that program, not when it was implemented, because there's a long history to that, but in recent years that has been the foremost justification for it. And Mr. Speaker, I would also point out to tie smaller communities to larger subscriber, to exchanges with large numbers of subscribers carries with it the potential for considerable future cost for extended flat rate. It is not correct to assume that extended flat rate is free. It is definitely not free. There is a flat rate charge, and that charge is being reassessed now in some instances because of the cost, the burden that is gradually being imposed on the total telephone system because of the extension of flat rates.
Will the Minister please explain why he simply doesn't extend the program for Mirror to both Lacombe and Red Deer? Is cost an issue, which seems unlikely given that it wasn't an issue in extending that service to residents of Trochu?
Mr. Speaker, I've already indicated that there are many communities that would like service to other either business centers or other communities, other telephone exchanges. They cannot all be accommodated. There is a total cost to the system overall, and in some instances there is also a technical problem until the exchanges are modernized with digital equipment. Mr. Speaker, I may point out that there are occasions when the addition of or the provision of extended flat rate actually multiplies the number of calls by 6 times between telephone exchanges, and that has a very great bearing on the capacity of the exchange switches.
It seems that the Minister is indicating that cost is an important issue, but the flip side of that is that some residents are undoubtedly of this province are being asked to subsidize unfairly the telephone service to other residents. Could the Minister please comment on whether or not he believes this to be fair, particularly in the case such as Mirror versus Trochu, when Mirror is closer to Red Deer than Trochu is?
Mr. Speaker, there are regrettably a large number of communities that all want extended flat rate calling to someplace else. Also, Mr. Speaker, it is a fact that in many instances there is a substantial division within the community about which center it is they most want to call, and the current program of extended flat rate requires that everybody within that particular exchange pays. And it is my hope that we can examine some alternatives so that they would be subscriber sensitive. In other words, sensitive to the choice of the subscriber, and that the choice of the majority would not be inflicted quite as much on the minority as is the case currently with some of the exchanges.
Supplementary, Cypress Redcliffe. Pardon. Member for Lacombe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the Minister on the question of other services subsidizing the flat rate billing provided this past fall. Has there been any increases in charges in other areas to cover these services that are now provided to, well, let's say Red Deer to Lacombe?
If we have unanimous consent of the House to complete this series of questions. Opposed? Carried. Minister.
Mr. Speaker, if I understand the question, there have not been additional charges to other areas for the to compensate for extended flat rate. However, I have to indicate to honourable members that there is an internal review being done by Alberta Government Telephones as to the cost to their system for the extended flat rate, and that does have some potential significance in the future, and it may well be that the system will need some modification to be, as I indicated earlier, more consumer sensitive and choice sensitive in the future.
Chair recognizes Edmonton Millwoods.
Mr. Speaker, to the Minister, given his previous sympathy for local measured service and his government's general support for user fees of all kinds, can the Minister tell the House today what policy direction he's giving to AGT in regards to extended flat rate calling? Can we expect an enhancement of extended flat rate calling for the benefit of small communities like Mirror, or is his policy direction to contract that service and extract more fees from Albertans around the province?
Mr. Speaker, apart from the trite observation that there are very few free goods in the world, and the telephone service is not one of them, I can indicate that that's right, and this is the point I'm coming to, that with lower rates, it is quite obvious that there is a great deal more telephoning that goes on, especially in the long distance category. Accordingly, we are examining currently, or having some work done on the possibility that lower rates would increase the amount of calling once we have new switching gear in place, to the point that lower rates times more numbers of calls will yield at least as much income, if not more, to the telephone company than at present. And if that would work, then we may be able to have a system which is consumer sensitive and choice sensitive, and that the person who makes a lot of calls, even though not paying so much per call, will be paying for the enhancement of the system.
Additional supplementaries. Time for question period has expired. Orders of the day. Might we revert briefly to introduction of special